the galaxy's greatest joke. The Galactic Union High Council Chamber was a marvel of alien architecture. Towering crystalline columns arched into a dome that shimmered with holographic constellations. Representatives from 37 worlds sat in tiered seats, their features as varied as the stars themselves. Some were scaled, some furred, others glimmered with bioluminescent skin. All of them shared one common trait that day, barely concealed amusement. At the center of the chamber, the Union's supreme commander, High Marshal Vorthen of the Seleth, addressed the gathering. His voice carried the smooth, resonant tone of a leader confident in his superiority. The Krath Dominion, Vorthen began, have deployed their armadas to the Illyria sector. They threaten our mining worlds and supply lines. We will repel them with the combined might of the Union fleet. The holomap shifted, showing tactical formations and fleets designated by each member world. The room buzzed with confident chatter, until the human delegation's slot lit up. "Ah," Vorthen said, allowing himself a sly grin. "And here we have our newest allies." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The humans had only joined the Union 2 standard cycles ago. Compared to the elder races, their technology was barely past its infancy. No antimatter warheads, no gravitic shields, no wormhole stabilizers. Their warships, by Union standards, were laughably small. Captain Sarah Kane stood with her hands behind her back, flanked by Commander Jonah Price. Both wore Earth's dark navy uniforms, their polished boots reflecting the chamber's blue light. Kane's face was unreadable. Price wore the faintest of smirks. An insectoid representative from the Velth clicked its mandibles and leaned forward. "Tell us, Captain Kane, what will your species contribute to this engagement? Slingshots? Perhaps stones?" The chamber erupted in chittering laughter, guttural roars, and the gurgling hums of alien mirth. Even a normally dignified Vorthen allowed a chuckle. Kane tilted her head, her eyes sweeping across the crowd. "Rocks, you say?" she said, her voice calm, deliberate. "Yes, I think we might bring rocks." The laughter intensified. Price didn't move, but Kane caught the quick upward twitch of his lip. "Primitive humor," muttered a delegate from the crystalline North. Humans always deflect with jokes when outclassed. The meeting continued, with strategy after strategy outlined in glowing blue lines. Massive Union dreadnoughts would engage the Krath fleet directly. Planetary defenses would focus on energy-based bombardments. Every plan revolved around sophisticated weaponry that had been honed over centuries of war. Humans were barely mentioned in the operational briefs, aside from a note about supplementary support. When the council adjourned, Kane and Price stepped into the corridor that led back to the human docking bay. The air outside the chamber was cooler, quieter, filled only with the distant hum of the station's reactors. "They think we're a joke," Price said at last. Kane's mouth curved into a faint smile. "Let them." The battle for Illyria began 2 days later. From orbit, the planet's surface shimmered with vast silver mining arrays, its plains scarred with extraction pits the size of cities. Above it hung the Union fleet, gleaming, multi-kilometer warships bristling with energy cannons. Beyond them, like a shadow rising from hyperspace, came the Krath Armada. Krath vessels were ugly, predatory things. Angular hulls wrapped in overlapping armor plates, their crimson running lights giving them a shark-like menace. The first exchange was brutal. Union energy beams slammed into Krath shields, only to fizzle against shimmering barriers. Plasma torpedoes blossomed against defensive fields that shifted frequency in milliseconds. The Krath returned fire with cutting particle lances that sliced through Union frigates like paper. From a human flagship Dauntless, Kane watched the tactical display. Green Union icons winked out far too quickly. She could hear the strained voices of alien commanders over the shared comms. Panic creeping in as they realized the Krath had adapted to every energy-based weapon in the Union's arsenal. "Captain," Price said from the weapons pit, "our deployment window's closing." "Then open it," Kane replied. The Dauntless shuddered as its launch bays opened. Dozens of cylindrical pods detached from the ship, drifting for a moment before igniting with a muted flare of magnetic acceleration. Each pod contained a single, dense rod of tungsten alloy, refined in Earth's deepest mass forges, polished to a perfect aerodynamic shape. The Krath didn't notice them. To their sensors, the pods looked like harmless debris. No power signatures, no energy emissions. Kane's voice was calm as she gave the order. Fire. In space, fire was silent, but the effect was anything but. The first rod hit a Krath cruiser at nearly 10 kilometers per second. No shield in the galaxy could stop that much kinetic energy concentrated into such a small point. The impact punched through the bow, vaporizing metal and atmosphere, igniting the fuel reserves deep inside. The cruiser bloomed into a molten fireball. Seconds later, another rod struck an orbital defense platform. It didn't explode. It simply ceased to exist in any functional shape, reduced to a spray of incandescent fragments. The alien commanders watching from their ships went silent. "What is that?" Vorthan's voice finally asked over the comms, stripped of its earlier condescension. Kane leaned toward the mic. "You call them rocks. We just throw them really fast." Price grinned openly now, "And we've got a lot more to throw." As more rods fell, the Krath formation began to break. Their shield harmonics were useless. Their armor meant nothing. The simple, ancient brutality of mass and velocity was rewriting the battle in humanity's favor. The aliens who had laughed 2 days ago now stared at their tactical displays in awed silence. For the first time in the war, the Krath pulled back. And humanity, once the galaxy's greatest joke, had just gotten the last laugh. The first stone falls. The aftermath of the Battle of Illyria was unlike anything the Galactic Union had ever seen. Reports poured in from every surviving ship. Krath wreckage littered orbit, their fleet reduced by nearly half in less than an hour. What baffled the analysts most was not the casualty count, but the method. No energy traces, no antimatter spikes, no exotic particles, just impact signatures. The Union's tactical database was flooded with queries from alien engineers desperate to understand the human weapons. Most were convinced it had to be some form of cloaked missile or dimensional warhead. The truth was almost insulting in its simplicity. On board the Dauntless, Captain Kane stood before the viewing pane, watching the smoldering remains of a Krath battlecruiser drift into Illyria's gravity well. "They'll come back," she said quietly. Commander Price didn't look up from his console. "Let them. We've still got a full magazine." 2 days later, the humans were summoned to the Union's primary war council aboard the flagship Glory of Seleth. The chamber was quieter than their last visit. No mocking laughter this time, only wary stares. High Marshal Vorthan's gaze was sharp, his tone clipped. "Captain Kane," he began, "our intelligence suggests the Krath are regrouping in the Dvorn system. Their intent is retaliation. We require an explanation of the rocks." Kane clasped her hands behind her back. "Kinetic penetrators," she said simply. "Dense tungsten and depleted uranium rods, launched at hypersonic velocities from orbital mass drivers." One of the crystalline North delegates leaned forward. "But that is primitive. We abandoned projectile weapons centuries ago for energy precision." "Your energy weapons bounce off their adaptive shields," Price cut in. "Our projectiles ignore the shields entirely. Physics doesn't care about shield harmonics." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Vorthan's mandibles flexed in thought. "And you can build more of these?" "We can mine and refine them faster than you can grow a fleet," Kane said. "And they cost a fraction of one of your plasma torpedoes." The conversation ended with no further insults, only an unspoken acknowledgement that the humans had something the Union needed. The Dvorn system was a hostile place. 3 volcanic worlds orbiting a bloated red star, surrounded by asteroid belts and debris fields. The Krath had chosen it for its natural hazards, confident it would deter Union forces. When the combined fleet emerged from hyperspace, the Krath were ready. Their ships moved like a wall of black steel, shields flaring as they adjusted frequencies to incoming Union energy fire. Union vessels answered with disciplined volleys, but again, the Krath defenses held. On the Dauntless, Kane watched the tactical display with the patience of a predator. The human fleet had remained in the rear, letting the larger Union warships draw attention. "Targets locked?" she asked. "Locked and confirmed," Price replied. "Pods 1 through 20 are in launch alignment." "Release." The pods launched silently, gliding toward the inner asteroid belt. The Krath didn't react. They still hadn't learned to see mass as a threat. Once in position, the pods anchored themselves to tumbling asteroids, engaged mass drivers, and began accelerating preloaded rods toward the Krath's command cluster. The first impact struck without warning. A Krath destroyer's midsection imploded as the rod punched through and out the other side, dragging half the ship's reactor mass with it into the void. The second impact landed a heartbeat later, obliterating a carrier's flight deck and sending its fighter complement spinning into deep space. The Union's comm channels erupted with shock. "What is happening?" barked an Athari fleet captain. Kane's voice cut through, calm as ever. "Gravity, mass, velocity. That's all. No shields in the galaxy can stop it." Within minutes, a third of the Krath fleet was either crippled or retreating. The rest broke formation entirely, scattering to avoid becoming the next target. But the humans had anticipated that. Pods positioned on the far side of the asteroid belt fired in staggered waves, forcing the Krath ships into predictable escape vectors, right into the path of Union dreadnoughts waiting with plasma batteries primed. It was a slaughter. When the last Krath vessel limped out of the system, the combined fleet regrouped around Dvorn's third moon. Kane stood in the dauntless war room, surrounded by alien officers who only days ago had dismissed her entirely. Now, they studied her like a weapon in human skin. "You've given us a tool that changes everything," Vorthan said. His tone was no longer patronizing. There was an edge of respect, maybe even unease. "But the Krath will adapt. They always do." "They'll try," Kane replied. "But for every counter they develop, we'll find another angle. We've been throwing rocks since we learned to stand upright. It's in our nature." Price chuckled. "And we got a lot of rocks left." There was no laughter from the aliens this time, only the shared realization that the humans had just shifted the balance of the war. In the silence that followed, the comm officer announced incoming long-range scans. Krath reinforcements, a larger fleet than either battle so far, inbound toward a Union core world. Kane turned toward Vorthan. "Then I suggest we start loading more rocks." The High Marshal gave a slow nod. "Agreed. This time, you lead the strike." By the time the Dauntless broke orbit, the Krath had no idea that their own momentum had just carried them into a storm unlike anything the galaxy had seen in centuries. A storm made of silent, invisible death hurtling faster than thought. And humanity, the galaxy's supposed primitives, were the ones who had unleashed it. The Rock War. The Krath reinforcements never reached their intended target. By the time they emerged from hyperspace in the Valoran corridor, they found themselves not facing the massive wall of Union warships they expected, but empty space. At least, empty at first glance. Then the rocks fell. From the shadows of Valoran's twin asteroid belts, hundreds of mass driver pods fired in coordinated salvos. Rods of tungsten and depleted uranium screamed silently through the void, striking the Krath vanguard before they even raised their shields. The first wave was devastating. A destroyer spun in two halves, its forward section crumbling into debris while the aft vented atmosphere in a glittering plume. A carrier lost its entire bridge in a single impact, leaving it drifting and blind. Shield harmonics flickered uselessly. Mass cared nothing for frequency. The Krath, already wary from Illyria and Dvorn, attempted evasive maneuvers, but the humans had anticipated every vector. Pods hidden on opposing sides of the belt fired in staggered rhythms, herding the Krath into the arcs of waiting Union capital ships. What followed wasn't a battle, it was a rout. In the weeks that followed, the Union shifted its entire war doctrine. Human ships were no longer relegated to supplementary support in fleet formations. They were now the spearhead. Wherever the Krath dug in, the humans would appear in orbit, rain down kinetic fire, and leave only wreckage behind. It was cost-effective, brutally efficient, and terrifying to watch. Alien media outlets began airing footage of the impacts, spliced together with commentary from war analysts who used to mock Earth's capabilities. Entire worlds tuned in to watch the rock drops, and it became an event, equal parts propaganda and warning. Within months, the Krath had given humanity a name in their own guttural tongue, the Stone Demons. It was meant as an insult, but humans embraced it. Earth's fleets painted jagged white rock symbols on their hulls. Crews wore patches showing primitive cave drawings of hunters crushing prey beneath boulders. Even the Union fleets started adopting the imagery, though never with the same swagger. But the Krath weren't idle. In intercepted transmissions, Union intelligence discovered that the Dominion's War Council had authorized the development of kinetic interceptors, fast, agile drones designed to destroy incoming rods before impact. They also began deploying larger shield bubbles around key installations, hoping to deflect some of the incoming mass. On the Dauntless, Commander Price examined the reports with a skeptical frown. They're learning. Captain Kane leaned against the Holidable. Let them. Shields are still vulnerable if we increase speed and mass. And if they want to deploy interceptors, we'll just fire more than they can handle. The human fleet began testing new tactics. Cluster launches that split into dozens of smaller penetrators mid-flight, each one still moving fast enough to kill. They even started using decoy rods filled with chaff to overload targeting systems. It became an arms race, but one humanity was perfectly comfortable with. The Union planned its largest offensive yet, a direct push into Krath-controlled territory. 3 key shipyards, all within a single sector, would be targeted simultaneously. The humans would lead each strike, with Union fleets mopping up what survived. The first target was Torvek Prime, a heavily fortified world bristling with orbital platforms and ringed by defense fleets. The Krath were ready for energy bombardments and mass troop landings. What they weren't ready for was a storm of rocks. From 3 separate launch points, 2 from low orbit around Torvek's moons, and 1 from deep space beyond sensor range, mass drivers unleashed a perfectly timed triple strike. The first wave shredded the orbital defenses, the second wave cratered the shipyard's dry docks, and the third obliterated the planetary command bunkers in a single synchronized impact. Kane's fleet never even entered direct weapons range of the Krath main fleet. By the time they moved in, the Krath were already retreating, abandoning the planet without a ground battle. The psychological effect was more damaging than the physical. Krath crews began to hesitate in battle, glancing constantly at their long-range sensors, knowing that death could come without warning, without light, without sound, just a silent, invisible object moving faster than thought. Union morale, meanwhile, soared. Species that had lost faith in the war now demanded more human-led strikes. Even the Seleth, once the most vocal critics, began requesting joint operations with Earth's fleets. For Kane, the change was tangible. She was no longer the human observer at council meetings. She was now called upon to give tactical recommendations, her words carrying weight equal to leaders who had been at war for centuries. It was an irony she didn't miss. Humans, the newest and least advanced race in the Union, were now shaping the war's future. The War Council met again aboard the Glory of Seleth, this time in an atmosphere of urgency. Union intelligence had located the Krath's primary fleet reserve, a massive staging area deep within Dominion space, protected by multiple planetary shields. Vorthan addressed the gathered commanders. This is our chance to end their capacity for prolonged war. But without breaching those shields, our attack will fail. Kane smiled faintly. Then we'll drop something big enough they can't shield against it. Price raised an eyebrow. Thinking what I'm thinking? She nodded. Asteroids, not just rods. Full-scale, armor-plated, course-correcting asteroids. The chamber went silent, the implication settling over every delegate. The plan would be devastating. It would also be decisive. That night, as the Dauntless prepared for departure, Kane stood alone in the observation deck, looking out at the field of stars. Somewhere out there, the Krath were certain they still had the advantage. But soon, they'd learn that humans didn't just throw rocks. They threw mountains. The day the rocks fell, the asteroid wasn't much to look at, jagged, irregular, pockmarked from 1 billion years drifting in the void. But in the war room of the Dauntless, it was the centerpiece of humanity's most ambitious plan yet. On the holo display, the asteroid loomed over a rotating wireframe model of the Krath's primary fleet reserve, nestled in their home system of Krath Prime. Dozens of heavily armed stations encircled the world, and 3 overlapping planetary shields glowed like layers of glass. Shields can repel concentrated energy, Kane said to the assembled Union commanders. They can even deflect a few small mass strikes. But they can't stop a 2-billion-ton rock moving at 20 kilometers per second. Price tapped a control, and the hollow asteroid shimmered, now showing a dense plating of scavenged ship armor and embedded maneuvering thrusters. It won't just fall, he said. It will steer. The Union delegates shifted uncomfortably. To them, the concept was as primitive as it was terrifying. The Seleth commander Vorthen leaned forward. This is not merely a strike. This is annihilation. Kane didn't blink. It's war. The operation began in silence. For human ships entered the uninhabited Vera system, where an asteroid belt the size of a small nebula waited. Mining drones swarmed over their chosen target, carving channels for thrusters, embedding control systems, and welding armor plates until the asteroid was less rock and more weapon. For 2 weeks, they accelerated it toward a carefully plotted hyperspace point. The Krath never detected it. They weren't watching this far out. At the final jump, the Dauntless and her escort dropped into the outskirts of Krath Prime. Their sudden arrival lit up Krath sensors. The Dominion fleet surged forward to engage, confident they could destroy the intruders. That was when the asteroid arrived. It emerged from hyperspace like a phantom, silent, inertial, unstoppable. The Krath's first scans didn't understand what they were looking at. No power signature, no targeting system, just a mass. By the time they understood, it was already moving too fast. The Dominion's interceptor drone scrambled, unleashing volleys of plasma and railgun fire. Against a ship, they would have been devastating. Against a 2-billion-ton rock, they were like rain on a mountain. Kane stood on the Dauntless bridge, eyes locked on the hollow feed. Adjust pitch by 2 degrees, she ordered. Let it glance off the outer fleet before it hits. The maneuvering thrusters fired. The asteroid's edge clipped the Krath's forward battle line. In seconds, 6 ships simply ceased to exist, crushed, torn apart, or hurled into each other in catastrophic collisions. The rest scattered in panic. The rock did not slow. The planetary shields flared bright as it struck. For a fraction of a second, the defensive fields held, glowing, pulsing, straining against the impossible mass. Then they collapsed in a cascade of shattered energy, the overload rippling through every connected generator on the planet's surface. The asteroid slammed into the Krath's primary orbital shipyard. The station vaporized instantly, the blast wave ripping through the tethered half-built dreadnoughts like they were made of paper. Fragments the size of buildings rained down toward the surface, trailing fire across the atmosphere. Every Krath ship in orbit broke formation, some fleeing outright, others spinning out of control in the gravitational chaos. On the Union comnet, silence reigned for several seconds. Then Vorthen's voice, low and steady. The Krath fleet is broken. Their shields are gone. Strike now. The Union Armada surged forward. Seleth dreadnoughts, North Shard cruisers, and Athari spear frigates swept through the debris fields, tearing apart what remained of Krath resistance. The Dauntless held back from the mop-up. Kane's job was already done. 3 days later, the Krath Dominion formally surrendered. Their war council transmitted an unconditional offer of peace, their terms humble and without the arrogance they once carried. In the final communication, the Krath leader uttered a phrase that would be repeated across the galaxy for centuries. Tell the stone demons, we yield. The war ended faster than any Union strategist had predicted. The victory parades were largest on Earth. not because humanity had suffered the most, but because they had changed the course of galactic history with the simplest weapon imaginable. At the Grand Union ceremony aboard the Glory of Selith, Captain Sarah Kane stood beside High Marshal Vorthen as the peace accords were signed. When it came time for speeches, Vorthen spoke first. In this war, we learned a truth older than the stars. Technology can evolve endlessly, but ingenuity comes from the mind and from the will to survive. The humans taught us this truth. Then Kane stepped forward. She scanned the crowd. Leaders, soldiers, diplomats from dozens of worlds, many of whom had once laughed at humanity's arrival. When we came into this war, she began, you saw us as primitives. You thought we were behind you, that we had nothing to offer. Maybe you were right about one thing. We are primitive. We've been throwing rocks since the dawn of our species. We just never stopped finding new ways to throw them harder. A ripple of low laughter passed through the chamber, not mocking this time, but acknowledging. Later, on the observation deck of the Dauntless, Kane stood with Price, looking out at the drifting stars. The war was over, but the galaxy would never forget what humanity had done. Think they'll underestimate us again? Price asked. Kane smirked. I hope so. Makes it easier. He chuckled. And if they don't? She turned, her gaze sharp. Then we'll remind them. We still got plenty of rocks. Far away, Krath Prime rotated slowly beneath its new peace accords. And in the archives of the Galactic Union, the day was recorded forever under a simple name. The day the rocks fell.